Before I begin this episode, it is important to acknowledge that the book I am discussing contains harmful depictions of people of color. These books, of course, are reflections of Eurocentric societal views from the time they were written, and said views are inexcusable. For the sake of following the plot, I will be discussing these chapters as they are written, but it's important to learn from the damage they've done and continue to do the work to break these stereotypes and educate ourselves. Hello everyone, and welcome to the wonderful recap of Oz. My name is Justin Peavy, and I will be reading through L. Frank Baum's novels and diving into a few of the countless film, television, stage, and literary adaptations taking place in the magical land of Oz. After attempting to conclude the Oz books, L. Frank Baum filed for bankruptcy in 1911. He attempted to publish new stories to bring in some revenue, and two of these books included The Sea Fairies and Sky Island. And despite their critical success, they didn't gain as much revenue as the Oz books did. Baum's publisher, Riley and Britton, suggested that there would be more success in a return to the Oz series, and so he collaborated again with John R. Neal, and The Patchwork Girl of Oz was published in 1913. Baum would eventually call Patchwork Girl one of the best books he had ever written. There are quite a few interesting facts about this installment in particular. First of all, we know of a chapter that Baum had written for this book called The Garden of Meats. It was meant to depict a race of vegetable-based people similar to the Mangaboos in Book 4. The main characters would then discover that these people would grow human bodies on plants. This was deemed too mature for his young audience, so Baum deleted the text at the request of his publisher. The return to the Oz series proved to be successful, critically and financially. There was no doubt at this point that Oz was Baum's biggest moneymaker, which caused him to write 7 more installments in the span of 5 or 6 years. It was so successful that it was subsequently adapted into a film for the Oz Film Manufacturing Company in 1914. Baum himself wrote the script and produced the film alongside Louis Gottschalk and Thomas Edison. Yes, that Thomas Edison. The film has since entered the public domain and can be viewed online. Gottschalk, who is also a composer, collaborated with Baum to write a stage musical adaptation of this book as well. However, it was never staged. Coincidentally, in spring of 1913, a stage musical adaptation of Book 3 was produced in Los Angeles entitled The Tick-Tock Man of Oz. This was 8 years after the adaptation of Book 2, entitled simply The Wogglebug, received a brief run in Chicago. Neither of these productions were nearly as successful as the 1902 musical. I know what you're thinking. In the last book, Glinda sealed Oz off from the rest of the world, and Dorothy herself said that nobody would ever hear from Oz again. Why is there a 7th book, you ask? In the prologue, Baum reveals that he received several letters from children asking if the royal historian knew any other stories he could tell. He remedied this by following a clever child's suggestion. He set up a tower in his backyard so he could send wireless telegraphs to Oz. Eventually, he was able to contact Princess Dorothy, and the Shaggy Man translated the Morse code. He begged to learn more about Oz's history, and Dorothy and Ozma agreed to share some current events with him. I am sure you're excited to know the details of one of Baum's proudest achievements, so I won't delay telling you about it any further. Now presenting The Patchwork Girl of Oz. We meet a little Munchkin boy named Ojo, who lives in a small house in the forest with his uncle, referred to as Unc Nunky. Ojo is trying to find some food, but Unc, being a man of extremely few words, says there isn't any. The only food they have are the 2 loaves of bread growing on their bread tree, but they aren't even ripe yet. Of course, people in Oz don't starve to death, but they do get extremely hungry. So to avoid a life of poverty and unpleasant hunger, Ojo decides they should venture out of the forest and into Munchkin country the next day to find some food. When they wake up the next morning, Ojo and Unc Nunky dress in their traditional Munchkin garb, that being blue clothes and a pointed hat with a flat brim. After eating a small piece of bread, they start towards the nearby mountain. Turning right at the foot of the mountain, they decide to visit their nearest neighbor, Dr. Pipt, the crooked magician. They arrive 2 hours later and they're greeted at the door by Dr. Pip's wife. I admit I'm not certain how to pronounce her name, but I'm just going to go with Margaret. Margaret explains to her visitors that her husband is very busy, but she invites them inside for some food. Upon learning that the elder Munchkin only speaks one word at a time, Margaret correctly identifies him as Unc-Nunkie, who is known in Munchkin land as the Silent One. She also recognizes the boy as Ojo the Unlucky. Ojo didn't know this name was established for him, but he sadly finds it appropriate. Ojo is then treated to the nicest meal he's ever eaten. Over dinner, Margaret recalls that Unc-Nunkie used to be close friends with her husband. She leads them to Dr. Pip's workshop at the back of the house, where they come to realize how literal the term crooked magician is. There are 4 kettles in a row over a large fireplace, and, using the multiple angles of his arms and legs, Dr. Pip stirs them all simultaneously. He announces to his visitors that he is creating a new batch of the Powder of Life, working on it for nearly 6 years. He had exchanged the remainder of his Powder of Life during a transaction to the witch Mombi. However, she had cheated him by giving him Powder of Youth that was fake. He also reveals that he tested his first batch on their glass cat, and it succeeded in bringing the cat to life. When the cat refused to chase mice, Dr. Pip gave her some pink brains. But his plan backfired, because now she thinks she's a superior being who is too dignified to chase mice, so she's become quite a burden. The new batch Dr. Pip is working on is intended to bring Margaret's Patchwork girl to life. Margaret has always wanted to have a servant to take care of the housework, so she took an old multicolored patchwork quilt, cut it up, sewed it together again in the form of a girl, and stuffed it with cotton. She also used buttons for eyes, yarn for hair, and pearls for teeth. Her hopes are to use the powder to animate her and make her their servant. Margaret promptly fetches her creation so she can show her visitors. She decides to give the girl some brains, but not so much that she decides to defy her masters. She goes into a cupboard with several bottles labeled with the following qualities: obedience, cleverness, judgment, courage, ingenuity, amiability, learning, truth, posy, and self-reliance. Margaret says the good qualities of a servant would be obedience, amiability, truth, and cleverness, so she pours some powdered contents from these bottles into a dish. Dr. Pip takes the kettles off of the fire, and while Margaret's back is turned, Ojo grabs the rest of the bottled qualities and sprinkles them into the dish. Margaret grabs the dish and places the powder in a ripped seam on the Patchwork girl's forehead. Now that she has her brains, Margaret sews up the seam. Since the powder has to cool before it can be used, Dr. Pip decides to sit down in his crooked fashion and catch up with his old friend in the meantime. The magician explains that he is not allowed to perform magic because the practice has been banned by Ozma. The only people in Oz who are exempt from this law are Glinda the Good and her apprentice, the Wizard. But this does not stop Dr. Pip from creating the Powder of Life or his liquid of petrification, which turns anything it touches to solid marble. They hear a scratching at the door and Margaret goes to let the glass cat inside. The cat is completely transparent, so you can see her brains made of tiny pink balls. Her eyes are made of emeralds, and she has a red ruby serving as her heart. Dr. Pip introduces Unc-Nunkie and Ojo to the cat, whose name is Bungle, and casually reveals that Unc-Nunkie is a descendant of Munchkin royalty. But Bungle, being a cat, is clearly uninterested in anyone other than herself. Ojo and Unc-Nunkie spend the night at the Crooked Magician's house and enjoy a lovely breakfast the next morning. Dr. Pip and Margaret talk about the humble qualities that are being given to the Patchwork girl, and Ojo begins feeling guilty for altering Margaret's concoction. They all go into the workshop, and Dr. Pip plays some music on his phonograph, so that will be the first thing the Patchwork girl hears when she is brought to life. When the Patchwork girl is laid out on a bench, Dr. Pip grabs the bottle of powder and sprinkles it all over her. The Patchwork girl animates almost immediately, startling everyone in the room. Her sudden movements knock the powder bottle from Dr. Pip's hand, sending it flying across the room. Unc-Nunkie and Margaret leap backwards because of the excitement, and they bump into the shelf that carries the liquid of petrification. The bottle knocks over, pouring its contents over the both of them and promptly turning them to stone. Ojo and Dr. Pip run to their loved ones in despair as the Patchwork girl calms herself down. Completely oblivious to the tragedy that has just occurred, the Patchwork girl admires herself in the mirror and laughs. Bungle assumes she's laughing at how terrible she looks, but the Patchwork girl is proud of her the fact that she's an original, and based on her looks, She must be the supreme freak. Suddenly, a voice is heard from the phonograph. When the powder of life fell out of Dr. Pip's hand, it landed on the phonograph and ultimately animated that too. The phonograph begins to dance, which annoys Dr. Pip so much he has to barricade it into the corner. Ojo immediately takes blame for the chaos. After all, he is called Ojo the Unlucky. The Patchwork Girl suggests sprinkling the powder of life over the petrified Margaret and Unk Nunky, but unfortunately the remainder of it was wasted on the phonograph. Knowing that it would take another 6 years to brew a new batch of the powder, Dr. Pip announces that he can make a potion to reverse the spell, but the ingredients are very hard to find. The ingredients are a 6-leaved clover, the left wing of a yellow butterfly, a gill of water from a well that has never seen the light of day, 3 hairs from the tip of a woozy's tail, and a drop of oil from a live man's body. Ojo volunteers to search for these objects while Dr. Pip begins brewing a new batch of the powder of life. The Patchwork Girl offers to accompany him, but Dr. Pip objects because she is only a servant. She argues that, by helping Ojo in his quest, she is ultimately serving her masters. She starts reciting rhymes about their upcoming adventure, which makes Dr. Pip think the qualities in her brain may not be well balanced. Regardless, he approves the girl's request. Bungle then decides she will go too, and Dr. Pip objects because she is too fragile. Bungle says that she will be of great help to the cause, because her nice pink brains will serve them well. So Dr. Pip gives Ojo a basket with food and charms, Bungle gives the Patchwork Girl the nickname Scraps, which she happily adopts, and the 3 of them set out on their way. The 3 travelers combined have a lack of knowledge of the world outside of the forest, so they follow the only path they can find. Scraps is pleased by the queerness of the world she has suddenly found herself in. Ojo reveals that he is the person who gave her so many brains and grows concerned that they are too unbalanced. The Glass Cat, of course, thinks her brains are more superior because they're pink and you can see them work. After walking for a long time, Ojo takes some bread and cheese out of the basket. The bread and cheese is enchanted in a way that, no matter how many pieces are broken off, they will remain the same size. He enjoys some food and offers some to Scraps, who quickly learns that there is no opening past her mouth that will allow her to swallow food. Scraps is full of energy, leaping around, rhyming nonsensically, and talking about how proud she is of her vibrant colors. Ojo and Bungle discuss their concerns about her sanity, but they decide not to make a scene as they are certain she will be helpful on their adventure. They exit the forest at sundown and find a Munchkin with an axe standing in front of a small house. Scraps' sense of humor reminds the woodchopper of his old friend the Tin Woodman. He relays the story of Nick Chopper to his visitors, and they realize they will have to travel to visit him in the country of the Winkies in order to get the butterfly wing. They continue on the path until it's so dark they can no longer see it. Since the cat can see better in the dark, they tie a string to her and have her lead the way through the night. She brings them to a house and they knock on the door. A voice inside calls out to them asking to know what they want. After they state they need a place to stay for the night, they are invited inside as long as they go straight to bed and don't make a noise. When they go inside, they can't find the source of the voice. They make their way to the beds, but Scraps can't stop talking. Suddenly, an invisible force grabs her and throws her out the door. The door slams and locks behind her. Ojo and Bungle decide to go directly to sleep or else they will meet a similar fate. The next morning, Ojo awakens to find that a warm breakfast has been prepared. A voice tells him to eat it, so he happily does. On his way out, he thanks the voice for being so kind to him. Ojo and Bungle find Scraps playing with pebbles in the middle of the path. The Glass Cat scolds her for getting herself kicked out, but she's grateful she did. If she wasn't, then she wouldn't have been able to enjoy the stars or see the large wolf that circled the house in the night. Shortly after resuming their journey, they hear what sounds like footsteps behind them. They are shocked to see the phonograph affixed to its small table running after them. The phonograph announces that it had run away from Dr. Pip so it could continue to play music without interruptions or protest. The phonograph is thrilled to be with people who would like to hear its music. Sadly, nobody there wants the phonograph to join them except for Scraps. After the phonograph formally introduces himself as Victor Columbia Edison, Vic for short, Scraps explains that she would like to hear his music. He plays the only record he has on him, which upsets Ojo a great deal. They try to make the situation better by attempting to outrun Vic or flipping the record over in hopes of hearing better music. However, this doesn't seem to fix any problems. so Scraps tells Vic to bother someone else, ideally someone wicked. Vic trots away sadly. About half an hour later, they arrive at a house with a sign reading, Miss Foolish Owl and Mr. Wise Donkey, public advisors. They are quickly welcomed inside, finding a donkey in an apron dusting furniture, and an owl wearing a sunbonnet sitting upon the shelf. They ask for some free advice, but the owl and the donkey are far too interested in the strange travelers to deliver any coherent advice. After a lot of banter, the donkey suggests they walk along the yellow brick road to the Emerald City. They walk in silence for quite a long time looking for the road of yellow bricks before they come across a very tall fence. The fence encloses a small forest and it bears a sign that reads, Beware of the Woozy. Ojo is excited by the opportunity to get the hairs from a Woozy's tail, and so they climb over the fence. They wander through the small forest until they arrive at a cave. After some short deliberation as to what to do next, the Woozy exits the cave and comes face to face with its uninvited guests. The Woozy is a creature made entirely with squares, rectangles, and flat surfaces, with 4 legs and a tail. At the end of its tail grows 3 hairs. The Woozy is glad to have some people visiting him, because the only visitors he gets are Munchkin farmers who have a mind to annoy him. It turns out he isn't very dangerous at all, and he's been held in captivity because he keeps eating local honeybees. He has been locked in this enclosure for years and hasn't eaten since. Ojo offers him some bread and cheese, which the Woozy thoroughly enjoys. To express his gratitude, he asks Ojo if there is anything he can do in return. Ojo, of course, expresses that he would like the 3 hairs on the Woozy's tail. The Woozy is apprehensive at first, but after hearing the story of Margaret and Unc Nunky, he agrees to this condition. However, no matter how hard Ojo and Scraps try, they can't seem to pluck the hairs from his tail. Therefore, they must take the Woozy with them, in case Dr. Pipt knows how to properly extract the hairs. They walk to the fence, trying to find a way out. Unfortunately, the Woozy can't climb or dig. He can, however, shoot fire out of his eyes when he's angry. In order to activate this power, someone must say, Crizzle Crew, to the Woozy. This of course angers him because he has no idea what it means. So Ojo, Scraps, and Bungle all yell Crizzle Crew together, and fire flashes from the Woozy's eyes, burning a hole in the fence. Ojo extinguishes the fire to prevent further damage and makes the Woozy promise not to eat any honeybees on their journey. It isn't long before they find the yellow brick road. They head west to find their way out of Munchkin country and to the Emerald City. Eventually, they stumble upon large plants with color-changing leaves. Scraps moves forward to get a closer look, when a leaf bends down and envelops her. Scraps screams through the folded leaf as the glass cat is captured as well. Ojo and the Woozy try to run, but they are both taken by the leaves. Ojo struggles in the dark, trying to escape for hours. He hears a faint whistling sound, and he falls out of the leaf. He looks up at the man who saved him and finds himself in the presence of the Shaggy Man. He introduces himself quickly before he continues whistling a tune. The Shaggy Man explains that music makes the plants behave, and Ojo notices how still the leaves are while he whistles. Ojo asks if the Shaggy Man will rescue his companion, and within minutes he uses a large knife to cut down the plants carrying Bungle, the Woozy, and Scraps. Upon discovering the Patchwork Girl, the Shaggy Man bows and says he must introduce her to his friend, the Scarecrow. The rescued and their rescuer escape the reach of the plants, so the Shaggy Man decides to get to know his new friends. Everyone relays their own stories and objectives, and the Shaggy Man brainstorms some ways to get the ingredients for Dr. Pip's potion. He agrees to show them the way to the Emerald City to find a 6-leaf clover and introduce his friends to Ozma and Dorothy. Along the way, the Shaggy Man gets hungry. Ojo offers him some bread and cheese, but he declines it. Instead, the Shaggy Man brings out a bottle of square meals, which is essentially a very small tablet containing a 6-course dinner: soup, fish, roast meat, salad, apple dumplings, ice cream, and chocolate drops. Think of an earlier literary iteration of the 3-course dinner chewing gum from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. These meals were invented by Professor Wogglebug, and the Woozy isn't satisfied because he would much rather chew and taste the food than swallow it all at once. At this time, the phonograph reappears. Of course, they're disappointed by the possibility of having to listen to more music, but the Shaggy Man is interested to hear him play. After only one verse of a popular song, the Shaggy Man tells Vic to shut off the music. He threatens to take the phonograph apart and scatters pieces all over the country. Vic promptly runs away and is never seen again. As the afternoon passes by, the travelers find themselves in a rougher part of the country and decide to spend the night in a deserted cabin. After dinner, the Shaggy Man sings them a song about the land of Oz, its rulers, and their many friends they've made over the course of the last 7 books. The next morning, they continue their journey. Eventually, they realize they are not advancing along the road at all. The entire road has started to move backwards, and they are essentially just walking in place. The Shaggy Man is familiar with this trick in the road, and he tells everyone to turn around and walk backwards. Apparently this works because after a few minutes, they make their way back onto a stationary part of the road. Their next obstacle comes in the form of an oversized porcupine named Chiss. Chiss has the ability to shoot his quills in any desired direction, which makes him a dangerous foe. The Woozy announces that he could use his terrifying growl to scare off the porcupine. However, when he demonstrates, his roar turns out to be only a squeak. While the 4 of them deliberate, Chiss throws his quills in their direction. Scraps shields her friends from the thorns, as she can't feel pain, except one quill does impale the Shaggy Man's leg. Scraps removes the quill, and the Shaggy Man restrains the porcupine now that all of his quills are gone. The Shaggy Man won't let Chiss have the opportunity to harm anyone else, so he refuses to return the quills. Once they leave Chiss behind, Ojo uses a charm from the basket that cures the Shaggy Man's leg. Then they throw the quills into a pond, rendering them irretrievable. Just as the land becomes easier to travel through, they reach a high wall. They follow it until they reach a padlocked iron gate. Everyone but the Shaggy Man is deterred by this, for he announces that it's only an illusion. He says he has passed through this gate several times and asks everyone to close their eyes and grab onto each other. They walk forward for a few minutes until the Shaggy Man says they can reopen their eyes. They are astonished to find themselves in the green fields leading to the Emerald City, with the illusion of the gate far behind them. They make a brief stop at a farmhouse, where the holes left behind by the quills and Scraps' body are sewn up by the owner. When they're back on the road, Ojo starts looking for a 6-leaf clover in the grass. The Shaggy Man objects, because it's against the law to pick a 6-leaf clover and Ojo must wait until he receives consent first. Ojo, being an immature little boy, fights with the Shaggy Man for a bit and maintains a bad mood for the next couple hours of their journey. They soon hear the sound of someone singing, and before they know it, they've crossed paths with the Scarecrow riding on the Sawhorse. The Scarecrow and Scraps are immediately enamored by each other. They introduce themselves, exchange compliments, and compare their respective stuffing. After the Scarecrow and the Sawhorse are caught up to speed, they agree that they should pay a visit to Ozma and Dorothy to discuss the best course of action. The Scarecrow is on his way to pay a visit to Ginger and to have his ear repainted, but he's eager to return to the Emerald City that evening to become more acquainted with Scraps. As they travel, Ojo becomes paranoid that Ozma won't permit the restoration of Unk Nunkie. The Shaggy Man suggests they speak to Dorothy first, as it may encourage Ojo to have a sympathetic person on his side. They pass by many houses with green lawns and flower gardens, and Ojo lags behind the rest of his companions looking for clovers. He bends down and takes a closer look at the 6-leaf clover he had been looking for. While none of his friends are looking, he plucks the clover and tucks it into his basket. They arrive at the Emerald City and Scraps is so enticed by its beauty that she decides she will not return to Dr. Pip's home. At the gate, the soldier with the green whiskers steps out and orders them to halt. He announces that he has been ordered by Princess Ozma to arrest someone named Ojo the Unlucky for willfully breaking one of the laws of Oz. It is the first arrest he has ever had to make, as people in Oz rarely break the law. Scraps tries to defend Ojo, but the soldier handcuffs him and announces his right to a fair trial. Ojo hands his basket off to Scraps before he is fitted with a prisoner's robe, which is essentially a white sheet with 2 eye holes. The Shaggy Man agrees to take his friends directly to Dorothy, as Ojo is officially taken into custody. Ojo feels a mixture of shame and anger at the fact that he is branded a criminal immediately upon entering the Emerald City. The soldier brings him to a nice house, and they are greeted by a woman named Tollydiggle. She is the jailer of the Emerald City, and this is the first time she's had to perform her duty. Ojo is taken inside and the robe is removed. He finds himself in a beautifully decorated apartment with gold and satin furniture, a large bookcase, and plenty of games. Ojo is curious to know how long he will stay here before being taken to prison. Tollydiggle announces that this is his prison. The soldier leaves to report the successful capture of the prisoner to Ozma, and the jailer goes to prepare some mutton chops. Ojo is bewildered to have met such kind treatment. He notices that there are no locks anywhere and assumes it would be easy to escape, but he decides not to disobey the jailer's trust. When dinner is prepared, Ojo questions the quality of the prison. Tollydiggle explains that in Oz, a prisoner is considered unfortunate, so they must be treated kindly. The intent is to keep prisoners somewhere that will help them find strength and bravery. That way, they will become loyal citizens because they're strong enough to resist doing wrong. Tollydiggle begs the question, isn't one punished enough in knowing he has done wrong? Meanwhile, in the Emerald City, Princess Dorothy Gale is relaxing in the royal palace when Jellia Jam announces the arrival of the Shaggy Man and some other creatures. Dorothy is delighted to see them all, and she's fascinated by the presence of the Patchwork Girl in particular. She begins to inquire about the illegal practices of magic being performed by Dr. Pipt, and learns how Scraps and Bungle were created, as well as the conundrum that Margaret and Unc-Nunkie have found themselves in. The Shaggy Man explains that they fear Ojo may have picked a 6-leaf clover, which shocks Dorothy. As the two of them continue to talk, Scraps starts rummaging through Ojo's basket. She finds the 6-leaf clover and decides to hide the evidence by dropping it into a vase in Dorothy's room. Scraps, Woozy, and the Glass Cat are sent to different rooms in the palace while the Shaggy Man prepares for dinner. Princess Ozma enters the dining hall and greets her friends at the table, consisting of Princess Dorothy, the Wizard, the Scarecrow, and the Shaggy Man. They discuss the arrival of the Patchwork Girl, whom the Scarecrow gushes over, and the Shaggy Man recounts his encounters with the monstrous plants and the giant porcupine. They also talk about Dr. Pipt and his powder of life, and although he's breaking the law by making it, Ozma acknowledges that his powder is what sparked the events leading her to reclaim her place as ruler of Oz. The next morning, Ojo is taken to the royal palace to appear before Ozma. In the throne room, hundreds of people have assembled to see the prisoner be tried. Ozma announces that Ojo has broken the law by picking a 6-leaf clover, even after being warned against it. Scraps interrupts and says that nobody would be able to find said clover anywhere on his person or in his basket. However, Ozma is already aware that Scraps has tried to dispose of the evidence. Ojo pleads guilty, announcing that he picked it to save his uncle and was scared Ozma would deny the ability for him to pick one. Ojo apologizes, and Ozma forgives him. She orders the soldier to release him and elects to call him Ojo the Lucky. The citizens leave the throne room, but Ozma remains with Ojo and his friends. Ojo goes into great detail about his story, and Ozma decides it would be best to allow Dr. Pipt to make the charm that reverses the petrification spell, but his powers are to be taken from him as soon as Unc-Nunkie and Margaret are rescued. She also decides that Ojo must be assisted in his quest to find the ingredients and returns the clover to him. Dorothy, Scraps, and the Scarecrow decide to go with Ojo to find the gill of water, the yellow butterfly, and the drop of oil. They spend the rest of the day in the palace thinking of where they can find these last few ingredients. The next day, they leave the Emerald City and after a long day of traveling, stay for the night at the home of Jack Pumpkinhead. In the morning, they plan to go to the mountains in Quadling Country to find a dark well hidden in some rocks and caverns. They bid Jack goodbye and head south. After 2 days, they reach a sandy plain with palm trees at nightfall. Their vision is obscured, but they can just make out black, circular objects. Dorothy moves closer to examine one of them, when the top flies open and someone leaps out. Suddenly, all of the dots spew out even more people until there are over 100 of them surrounding the travelers. The author describes these characters using racist caricatures of the Khoikhoi people indigenous to southwestern Africa. They also announce themselves as the Tottenhots, which is a spoonerism meant to resemble a slur established by European and American pop culture. They tell Dorothy that they are mischievous and only come out at night, but that they won't harm their guests if they play with them. They promptly seize the Scarecrow and Scraps and gleefully toss them amongst each other. This angers Dorothy, who intervenes and rescues her friends. When she and Toto start to fight back, they all flee and return to their roundhouses. One of these mischievous quadlings reappears and asks why their visitors have no sense of humor. He defends his actions as simple roughhousing, with nighttime being the only time they can play without fear of the dangers that lurk in Quadling Country. The Scarecrow and Scraps forgive him, and the man agrees to behave if the visitors behave. Dorothy makes a counteroffer. She says they can all play outside if he offers her and her friends a place to stay for the night. He happily agrees. Once the house is vacant, Dorothy, Ojo, Toto, Scraps, and the Scarecrow make their way inside. Dorothy and Ojo quickly fall asleep, while Scraps and the Scarecrow whisper to each other all night. In the morning, the owner of the house returns and asks them to leave. Dorothy wonders if he knows where a dark well could be found, but he is of no help, so they decide to find a well on their own. They climb over the hills and rocks until they find a sign reading, "Beware the captive Yoop." After a sharp turn, they arrive at a large cave with an iron gate fixed onto it. There is yet another sign which reads, "Mr. Yoop, his cave, the largest untamed giant in captivity. Strangers approaching this cave do so at their own peril." It also says he is 21 feet tall, weighs 1,640 pounds, is over 400 years old, has a fierce and ferocious temper, and a ravenous appetite. The Yoop appears and grabs the iron bars of his prison. He is so glad to see some good meat passing by, but of course, the travelers will not allow him to eat them. The Scarecrow plans for everyone to run past the cave before the Yoop can grab them through the bars. The Scarecrow runs first, and the Yoop promptly seizes him. After everyone has safely run out of reach of the Yoop, the giant realizes that he has grabbed the Straw Man and throws him at Ojo. Everyone is knocked over by the sudden blow, but nobody is hurt. They continue along the rocky terrain until they find the road to the country of the Hoppers. They follow the path but reach a dead end in the form of a large boulder. Dorothy is tired from the walk, so decides to lean against the boulder for a quick moment of rest. However, when she leans against the rock, it swings backwards, revealing the entrance to a tunnel. They decide this might be the perfect place to find a dark well, so they venture into the cave. They walk through the dimly lit tunnel until Toto begins to bark at a man asleep on the floor. He wakes up and stands upright. They find that, connected to his round body, is only one very stout leg. The man introduces himself as Hip Hopper, the champion wrestler. Dorothy inquires about a dark well, and he says they'd have better luck in the Horner country. However, they can't pass between countries at the moment because the two nations are at war with each other. Apparently, a Horner made a comment that Hoppers are lacking in understanding, so the Hoppers intend to conquer them later that afternoon. In the meantime, he agrees to bring the visitors to the entrance to Horner country. They follow the champion as he hops to lead the way past the small village of Hoppers. Passers-by acknowledge the danger of encountering the Horners, since they have two legs, as well as sharp horns in the center of their foreheads. However, the one-legged Hoppers insist on fighting them. The champions lead them to a large picket fence that separates the two countries. The Scarecrow offers to speak to the Horners to bring peace between them. He also asks the champion to throw him over the fence given how light he is. The champion complies, but the Scarecrow is just slightly underweight. He lands right on top of the fence and gets caught on one of the pickets, leaving him stuck on his back. Scraps volunteers to be thrown next to rescue her friend, since her cotton stuffing is heavier than the Scarecrow's straw. However, she sails too far over the Scarecrow and lands on the ground in Horner country. The chief of the Horners, called Jack, interrogates the intruder, acknowledging that she has two legs and can't be a Hopper. Scraps says the Horners have insulted the Hoppers, which they deny. They say they simply made a joke that the Hoppers have less understanding because they only have one leg instead of two. Therefore, they have less understanding. The chief laughs at the joke and his fellow Horners join in with them. Scraps then says they may not need to apologize, but rather explain their joke to prevent a war. So they call upon the source of the joke, a miner by the name of Dixie Horner, to explain the joke to the Hoppers. While they wait for Dixie's arrival, the chief introduces Scraps to his 19 overly polite daughters and brings her to his house with furniture made of radium, which they mine for in Horner country. When Dixie appears, they all go to the fence to speak with the Hoppers. The Hoppers don't understand the joke still, but Dorothy just tells them to laugh and pretend they think it's funny. They do this and promptly declare peace. The Horners then offer a ladder so they can free the Scarecrow. Dorothy even patches up the hole in his back that was left behind by one of the pickets. Ojo then wants to know if there is a dark well in the radium mine. Dixie says there is, and agrees to lead them to it. At the end of the cave, Dixie brings everyone to a hole in the ground that leads to the well. They follow Dixie through the cave in the pitch darkness, following his instructions as to where to step. A slight misstep causes Scraps to fall over, causing a domino effect that knocks everyone to the floor. They begin to slide down the incline of the cave until they reach the bottom. When they recover, they all take hands and Dixie brings them to the well. Dorothy gives Ojo a golden flask before he kneels down and feels for the water with his hands. He fills the flask, screws the top, and announces they can make their way out of the cave. As soon as they are back onto the mountain path, Dorothy leads everyone in the direction of Winky Country to find a yellow butterfly. They go down the mountain, heading west until they are cut off by a broad river, which travels in the direction of the country of the Winkies. Dorothy spots a nearby house and decides to ask the owner how they can cross the river. The quadling who answers the door doesn't know how to cross it, as he has never seen anyone do so before. He doesn't own a boat or a raft, and won't build one because he's too lazy. The Scarecrow offers him 6 square meal tablets if he agrees to build a raft for them. He agrees and immediately gets to work using fallen trees, wooden boards, gold nails, and his wife's clothesline to assemble the raft. It is evening when the work is done, and the man's wife is quite upset to find that her husband used so many of their resources to build a raft for the strangers. But once Dorothy introduces herself as a princess of Oz, the woman is mollified, and the travelers spend the night there. Dorothy, Ojo, the Scarecrow, and Scraps board the raft in the morning. With some help from the lazy quadling, they are pushed into the water and the current carries them at a rapid speed. After a few miles, however, the raft slows down, stops, and starts to float backwards. They pass by the quadling's house again, and the man calls out to them saying he forgot to mention that the river changes direction every so often. After going back and forth for a bit, Ojo spots some large fish in the water. He affixes a loose part of the clothesline to a gold nail he fashions into a hook. He attaches some bread to the hook and drops it in the water. Almost immediately, a large fish is hooked and starts carrying the raft towards Winky Country. Despite the sudden change in the direction of the current, the fish persists. Eventually, when the current begins traveling west again, the fish grows tired, so they cut it free. They use nearby branches and makeshift poles to keep them from going backwards, but eventually the current stops changing. They start to see yellow plants, signifying their arrival in Winky Country. They safely land on the shore and make their way towards the Tin Castle. After a long walk, they're on the grounds of the Emperor of the Winkies, the beloved Tin Woodman. As soon as he hears Toto bark, the Tin Woodman comes out to greet his friends. He introduces himself to Ojo and Scraps, and he hears the story of the Patchwork Girl's creation and the incident regarding Margaret and Unc-Nunkie. While they talk, Ojo realizes that a drop of oil is forming under the joint of the Tin Woodman's knee. He brings out a small vial and catches the droplet before it hits the floor. This puzzles the Tin Woodman, but Ojo is revealed to have obtained a drop of oil from a live man's body, which, until now, seemed like an impossible task. Ojo expresses that the last thing he needs is the left wing of a yellow butterfly. The Tin Woodman is shocked that he would ever make such a cruel request. He refuses to put a butterfly through torture and therefore forbids Ojo to get his last object. Everyone is visibly upset by this obstacle in their journey, so the Tin Woodman suggests returning to the Emerald City to receive Ozma's advice. Everyone heads back to the Emerald City in the morning, with Ojo lamenting how unlucky he is. He blames it on the fact that he was born on Friday the 13th, is left-handed, and has a wart under his right arm. The Tin Woodman tries to change the boy's perspective, asking him to reject superstition and focus more on how lucky he is. They see Ozma as soon as they arrive in the Emerald City. Ozma regrets that she hadn't known about the butterfly ingredient, otherwise she would have told Ojo he could never obtain it. Ojo was devastated, but Ozma announces that Dr. Pipt has been sent for. His kettles were destroyed and his recipe book has been burned, preventing him from ever making any more powder of life. She also states that the statues of Margaret and Unc-Nunkie have been brought to the palace. But that's not all. Ozma announces that Glinda the Good has been well aware of Dr. Pip's actions and Ojo's quest, and has instructed the Wizard of Oz how to properly reverse the spell. When Ozma brings everyone to the next room, Ojo runs to the statue of Unc-Nunkie in tears. They are joined in this room by the Glass Cat, the Woozy, the Shaggy Man, the Wizard, Dr. Pipt, the Cowardly Lion, and the Hungry Tiger. The wizard announces that Dr. Pipt's magic has been taken from him, making him nothing more than a simple Munchkin. At the wave of his hand, the magician's crooked limbs also straighten out. The wizard has also replaced Bungle's pink brains with transparent ones, so she will be more modest. The Woozy is being sent to the royal menagerie, and the Patchwork Girl, being beloved by everyone she's met, is invited to live in the royal palace. The wizard then publicly praises Ojo's devotion to his uncle, and announces Glinda has taught him how to reverse the charm of the liquid of petrification. He mutters a magic word to Margaret, and then to Unc-Nunkie, and at once they start to move again. Dr. Pipt celebrates a loving reunion with his wife, Unc-Nunkie thanks the wizard, and Ojo rushes into his arms. Ozma delivers the news that she's given Ojo and Unc-Nunkie a new house just outside of the Emerald City, so they may be under her protection. The Tin Woodman reiterates that the boy should be called Ojo the Lucky, and for the first time, Ojo agrees with that sentiment. This book was extremely cute. I love the Patchwork Girl and how over the top she is, it just adds to her charm. It was a fun read, and the stakes certainly felt high for the majority of the story. The book as a whole, however, feels a lot like a looser retelling of Book 1. I'm starting to really latch on to some of L. Frank Baum's patterns. You have the child protagonist, Ojo in this book, who must travel to the Emerald City to resolve his problem. He also has to travel through dangerous locations in Oz to get what a certain sorcerer is looking for before the conflict can be resolved. And then when all hope is lost and their last option is exhausted, Glinda saves the day. Part of me is frustrated that Glinda knew about Ojo's struggles for so long and didn't do anything to help until the Tin Woodman denied him the butterfly wing. For a powerful sorceress with a magic record book, you'd think she could be a little more proactive. And then, when you bring the Powder of Life into the plot, it feels like the second book. Which brings me to another continuity error that I noticed. In the Marvelous Land of Oz, it was implied that someone named Dr. Nicodick was the inventor of the Powder of Life and the wishing pills. And then in The Road to Oz, it was revealed that the crooked magician who made the Powder of Life had died in an accident, and the remainder of his Powder of Life went to his relative named Dinah. So it's unclear if Dr. Pipt and Dr. Nicodick are two separate entities, or if either of them truly died. This has been interpreted differently by future Oz historians, but I'm still a bit lost on the idea. Speaking of continuity issues, you may remember this from my last episode, but I brought up the fact that Toto doesn't talk in Oz. Allow me to read you the following excerpt from this book. "He can't talk, not being a fairy dog," explained Dorothy. "He's just a common United States dog, but that's a good deal, and I understand him, and he understands me, just as well if he could talk." So this still doesn't make sense to me. Bellina, Jim, and Eureka were all common United States animals that gained that ability when they entered Oz. My question remains unanswered, but a friend of mine suggested that Toto certainly can talk, but he simply has no need to. He has nothing to say, which I guess could be true. But I'm still confused as to why Dorothy hasn't acknowledged this. Regardless, this felt like a very fun return to the Oz series, despite its problems. There are lots of new characters that I definitely want to see more of, and I hope we get the opportunity. There are also lots of characters that I don't really want to see much more of, and I'd be interested to know what sort of relationship sparks between the Scarecrow and the Patchwork Girl, because let's face it, the chemistry is there. I also think my favorite part of this book is when Ojo is in prison, and instead of being punished, he gets to just have dinner and play games with his jailer. I don't really know what I expected a prison in Oz to be like, but that was a pleasant surprise. I love how the people of the Emerald City are just so kind, even when they don't need to be. As always, here are some of my favorite quotes from this installment. "Many a satin ribbon has a cotton back," said by the Woozy. "A little misery at times makes one appreciate happiness more," said by the Shaggy Man. "What a queer country America must be," said by Scraps. "It is kindness that makes one strong and brave," said by Tollydiggle. Thank you again for listening in. If you have any interest in supporting the podcast, you can visit anchor.fm/OzRecap. I hope to create some video companions to some of these episodes in the future, and becoming a supporter would help me better create content for my fellow Oz fans. If you are interested in reading the Oz series along with me, all of Baum's novels are in the public domain and available online for free. They're easy to read, and the illustrations alone are so interesting to behold. You are now all members of my Oz book club. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Well, That's all I've got. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at OzRecap for updates and more Oz content. Until next time, I'm Justin, and this has been the wonderful recap of Oz.